Just to let you know, this review won't include spoilers, so don't worry about that. And I'll try and stay away from any major sort of plot details. Uncharted is the latest video game franchise to get a live action sort of translation from the games. And, that's an area that I think sort of films in general have struggled with quite a lot. And a lot of films based on games often struggle to capture what made the games so good. And they either deviate too much from the games or try and copy it, beat for beat. But games, play out very differently to films. So it is about adapting it so it works in a film medium. And this film, I think, does an okay job of that when you compare it to other video game films. But I have to say, as a film on its own, it could be a lot better. There is a few elements that are a bit iffy there, but I think overall it was quite enjoyable. I think sort of people's biggest sort of worry going into this film is definitely sort of the casting for the two sort of main characters, which is Tom Holland as Nathan Drake and Mark Wahlberg as Sully.
What? No.
And it's easy to see why. All you have to do is take the two actors there and compare them to a screenshot out of the game, and it's quite clear, there's a huge difference there. And I guess the angle the filmmakers were going for is that this is sort of an origin story-esque, and they'll grow into those characters. But I think fans, they want to see characters they know. So I think a bit of an excuse just so they can use these actors, and then hopefully they do grow into the roles later. It's either that or they take in a huge creative risk and they've got a lot of faith, if they do go into sequels or whatever. And I think that's why they've hired them quite younger than their ages in sort of the video games, because if they are wanting to build a franchise off the back of this, they can definitely extend it for a few years, whereas if they'd hired someone maybe in his mid to late 30s, they might not have been as on board, 5 or 10 years later. But personally, I don't really have a history with the games. I've never played any of them. I've seen bits and pieces of them and I can understand sort of the fandom. But I think the two actors do a fine job. But I do kind of just see sort of Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg. I don't know if I see them as characters indifferent from their other films. So I can understand the point of what was previously said. But like I said, I don't have that personal sort of attachment to the game to where it really does negatively affect the experience. But I have to say, surprisingly, I think one of the highlights is that Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg have quite good chemistry and they bounce off each other quite well, which I think was quite surprising to see, but it does work. And I could definitely see them two working together again. So, this kind of hints at a sequel. And to be honest, they probably will if it does well at the box office. And, I think I'd be down for that just to see sort of the dynamic between them two. I have nothing to gauge it off in terms of is that accurate to the games or whatever. But I think for this film, if you just look at it, them two, I think they work quite well as a duo. We also have Chloe Fraser in the film as well, who's also another character from the games. And from what I've seen of the game, she seems the most accurate out of those sort of three. But yeah, I also like her in the film as well. She's kind of part of the trio. But it's kind of odd. She's kind of present in the film and is very much one of the main characters. I'd say she's only sort of in the film for like 2/3, and you'll see what I mean when you watch it, but she just kind of disappears at one point, and it's very odd. Like, you think, when is she going to turn up, and she just kind of doesn't. But it was just a very odd sort of narrative structure of introducing a character and then sort of leaving them out at a certain part where you think they'd be a part of it. Onto the other characters now. The villains of this film are a bit of a weird area. They're kind of weak, but I think in adventure films, the villains don't necessarily need to be, iconic. Like, I think Indiana Jones is probably the pinnacle of adventure films. I think a lot of people would agree, but a lot of people would also agree the villains in that aren't really iconic, I'd say. They do the job in the film, but no one's favourite villain is, like Belloc. But this film has a real problem of deciding who they want the villain to be, and it kind of switches all the time who is the main antagonist. And, it puts a lot of time into that for it to really not go anywhere. And I think it's a shame, like, just if you're trying to do somewhat of a complex antagonist, do it well. I wouldn't have minded if it wouldn't have spent much time on the antagonist and they were just sort of pretty basic, and that time was more focused on maybe action or more sort of solving puzzles and stuff like that. But they tried to go for kind of, they tried to characterize the villains quite a lot, and they didn't do it very well. Especially when the main motives are pretty much money. That's quite a boring goal, and I guess that's the goal of our heroes as well, but we're following them, we're not following the villains. So unlike, say, Indiana Jones, where if you look at all them films, the goal usually isn't monetary, and it adds a bit of a layer to someone. It's alright in these films as sort of a starting goal for characters, but as a goal throughout the film, it feels a bit weak and it's pretty boring. We've seen it over and over again. But I do think, the actors do a fine job, the villains, they get not much to work with, and Antonio Banderas is always cool in the roles he does. We also have Tati Gabrielle as Braddock, and she's fine as well. Like I said, the problem isn't really with the actors, it's more sort of the characters they play in, and they do the most with what they've been given. They didn't have much to work with, and it tried to make them complex, but it just didn't really go anywhere. And I wish you either commit to that or you just have them be basic and then put more time into other things. Good adventure films will have a plethora of locations, and I think this does a pretty good job of having, diverse sort of areas. But I do think maybe it could have varied a slight bit more. It does just feel like we've seen it before, and I wish it tried something a bit different, you know what I mean? But, that's fine. There's only so many places sort of these films will work. And especially that I do enjoy this film. It's kind of based on some history, so it is basing it off that, so it is limited by that, I do understand. Now, action-wise, this film is quite odd. If you've seen the trailers, you've kind of seen the best fight scenes, which is a bit unfortunate, the most elaborate ones. And other than that, there's nothing that really stands out. The big standout is definitely the scene that was pulled out the game where it's sort of him on the cargo and he has to climb back up into the, sort of the hangar bit of the plane. And we also get sort of, you see this in the trailer where these boats are being picked up and we get sort of an action scene there. And they're kind of the big memorable set pieces. And other than that, fights are pretty uninteresting and they don't have much variety, which I think is a real shame. I think this is a series where you can sort of push the boundaries of what is realistic, go for that sort of bombastic, over-the-top action sequences where the characters are sort of just getting out by the skin of their teeth. I feel like you can do that with this type of movie. It doesn't need to be like super serious and grounded, and it shows that in the film. It has sequences like that, but then there's other moments where it pulls back to reality. But overall, I thought this film was fine. It's pretty much what I expected. It was nothing amazing, but compared to a lot of other video game films, it's a lot better than them. But it does still have issues, and it seems they are pushing for a sequel. There is that groundwork there that could be sort of developed, and it could become interesting. And maybe Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg will grow more into these characters, if it is over a few years. I think maybe give them a bit of the benefit of the doubt. This is meant to be these characters at a time we haven't seen them before. I guess you could use that as an excuse. But yeah, I think overall, a fan film, I don't think it'll blow anyone away or, like really stick in your mind. And overall, I'll probably give it about maybe a 6 out of 10.
What?
You'd probably think that might be a bit generous, but I think, adapting a game is quite difficult, and I think it does it quite naturally. It doesn't feel like a game's been adapted, if you get what I mean by that. But that's also on the negative side where maybe it strayed a bit too far from the games. So yeah, overall, quite liked it, and I think maybe the series could have potential and it has a lot of room to grow. So hopefully we see that, and yeah, that's pretty much it. See you next time.
What? No.